Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Sandra Sucher joining us. Sandra, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Michael.
So Sandra, you are a professor of management practice at Harvard Business School. I think everyone will be familiar with Harvard. But prior to joining Harvard Business School, you were a senior executive at Fidelity Investments. You are known internationally as a researcher in the area of trust. And you co-authored a new book, which I'll pull up here, called The Power of Trust, and which I really enjoyed, talking about how companies can build it, lose it, retain it. And you also write for very well-known publications, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Business Insider, and a whole bunch of others. So excited to have you on today so we can dig deep into trust and how consultants can leverage this idea of trust amongst their clients, the marketplace, and their teams. But I thought today where we can maybe start off is we hear a lot about leadership, but you write more specifically around this concept of moral leadership. What does moral leadership actually mean? Can you kind of make that distinction between the typical leadership and what moral leadership is all about?
Headlines. Thank you so much for having me on. When I saw the description of your podcast, I just say that I am so down with living a life of true freedom, flexibility, and long-term success. So if I can get some of that out of this podcast, I will be a happy person. And I think it's a remarkable kind of an ambition for you to have. So moral leadership is taking into account decisions where moral issues are at stake. So there are tons of decisions that you need to make as a leader, and a whole lot of them don't really they're not in the moral domain. What market do I go after? What product do I serve that into that market? Even at times, who's my team? How do I think about that? And so there's a lot of stuff that doesn't involve this moral domain, but there are a whole lot of things that do. Right. And so, we're always running into situations, usually in business, it's what you would call a right versus right dilemma. So, usually when we think about morality, we think of morality as like right versus wrong. The number of times that comes up in most businesses is actually very small. And usually you sort of know that when you're looking at it. You may decide it one way or the other, but at least okay, something's up here. Most of the time in business, the moral challenge is to competing stakeholder interests, where each of them is right. So yes, I want to do really well by my clients, and I've got a team I'm trying to protect. So how do I think about that and compare them and think about what I owe to each of them? The other thing I'd say about moral leadership is that while it sounds and is quite aspirational to say, I want to be a moral leader, and I teach a course by that name, I actually never teach that as a goal, because that notion of I'm a moral leader, 724, I'm Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, that's not it. It's more if you talking about acts of moral leadership, when the moment to exercise moral leadership comes upon you, and giving you a way to think about what happens when you're in that moment, so that you can be somewhat more intentional about what's going on. So I look at it as very much sort of a day in the life than sort of this is who you are forever.
How critical is that? I mean, you mentioned the right versus right. So I think most people are clear when it's right versus wrong, right? That they can feel that, they can sense that inside. But when making that decision, whether it's right for the client and for the team and for the business and for your lifestyle, how would you kind of counsel someone on starting to think about that or explore that? Are there certain kind of exercises or frameworks, or how can someone just start to try and really understand how to make better decisions that are going to be win-win for everybody involved?
Right. So I think you would start with a couple of forms of moral reasoning. So there are different ways to reason morally. And so the most common is consequences. So what will happen to the people who are involved in this decision if I do action X? And that's really just teaching you to sort of pay attention to the consequences of your action for other people who are impacted by it. And we make, consequential based thinking, that is business thinking. I do X, then Y happens. So that's the most familiar one. There are definitely ways of thinking about, do I have duties, moral responsibilities in this situation? So COVID is a great example, where all of a sudden all businesses that have any kind of face-to-face contact face the fact that now they're responsible for other people's health.
Mm.
And so that's a responsibility, moral responsibility, to see that other people don't get harmed as a result of actions that you take. And some people then can say that you look at the fact that other people have rights that you need to protect, and so there's this big debate about whether or not you can have mandates in a business. And that's asking you to basically balance this question of what duties do I have and consequences that I worry about versus other people's rights to remain free to make their own decisions. So that, I've been thinking about this for a while. This is a classic moral dilemma. And the question is, how much do you privilege the rights versus the responsibilities and consequences that you're worried about? And so I think that that's part of it. There's another form of moral reasoning. You may regret asking this question that has to do with what are your role responsibilities. This is really important for consultants. So consultants are supposed to play a certain role. I'm supposed to give objective advice. I'm not supposed to have conflicts of interest. I'm supposed to look out for the interests of my client over my own. Right. And that kind of comes with the territory. And so some of the moral reasoning is, okay, as a consultant, what are the ethics that I feel I should hold myself to? And what's my aspiration there?
Any examples come to mind for you throughout your own career or consultants that you've worked with or come in contact you where maybe you've seen the morals kind of gone astray and it turns into a negative outcome versus those who really make this a priority and how it's actually maybe helped them to grow their business or to increase their trust or to turn a client relationship into a long-term client relationship?
So it's easier to find negative examples. So if you think about Arthur Andersen, why did Arthur Andersen have to go out of business? Because it did a lousy job as Enron's auditor. And so that's a very good example of the, honestly, the death-defying aspects of sort of not being good at your job. And people came and found the people at Arthur Andersen. People said, you were the person who was supposed to be giving objective advice, pointing out things that they were doing that were sketchy and questionable. Where were you on this?
Right.
Yeah, so that's an example of the way that it shows up. It's pretty direct. And particularly for people in advisory roles, because they do have this responsibility to protect the interest of the party who it is that they're advising.
Right.
So now your question about have I seen it play out in a positive sense in this particular domain, I'm going to have to give a pass at this point because I don't want to give you like a half-baked example.
Right.
Yeah, and so I'd rather give you no example, but say that I'm sure that there are examples. And I'll bet that if we were meeting with the people on the call, that they would say, well, I had this moment where I had to decide, so one classic problem for consultants, is this a client I really want to do business with? Have I seen things here that give me pause? Or is this a client that I really am going to get behind and really try to help them? And so I think that question about, is this the right person? There's also, is this the right project? Do I know enough about this to actually be valuable? Or is it just that I'm kind of taking advantage of the fact that we have a great relationship to build my business, but actually someone else might be better positioned to do this? And is there a point where you sort of say, you know what, this is a real problem. You've got it. I need to help you find who would be better at it than I would be.
How do you suggest somebody go about, being that open or really, I think this is probably a challenge that many consultants do wrestle with, where they maybe overstep, they stay too long at a client's place, or they charge maybe more, or they'll do something that they're not doing it to intentionally harm or hurt the client, but they're walking a fine line between like what is really necessary and what is not. How would you suggest that somebody kind of think about that? And how would you maybe try and encourage them to go one way or the other on that?
Hmm. So, there are some classic tests that you do in the face of a moral challenge. So there's the classic newspaper test,
Tell me
which,
about that.
so that test is if I read my actions on the front page of the Wall Street Journal,
Mm,
and it was an article about it, how would I feel about that?
right. Yeah. Powerful.
Right. And so it's a way of getting you to step outside your own perspective and
Mm,
see your actions through the lens of somebody else.
right.
So that's a very, very helpful way to sort of just be second guessing. There's also the partner slash mother slash good friend test, which lots of people use. I'm thinking of doing this, or I'm really worried about that. And what do you think? And trying to let someone in your network sort of help you figure it out.
Right.
But that takes a lot of time and effort on their part to be useful. But both of those are ways that you can start to, if you have a sense that that's what's going on. And I think the real question in the situation you just described is, how do you know you're there?
Mm,
So I think it's less hard to figure out what do you do when you are there, than to have the insight. And that really has to do more with some accumulation of knowledge and experience about the things that you want to be in business for. There's, this classic question about, why are you here?
hmm
What are you trying to make happen in this business? And I think the more thoughtful you can be about that, it'll make you somewhat more alert to the fact that inherent in consulting is this problem of staying on too long or overcommitting.
I'd love for you to elaborate on that concept of why are you here? Because in your book, you talk about the Japanese company Recruit and how their managers would actually say to their employees often, like, why are you here? Could you provide a little bit of context on that to the listeners and to everybody with us right now in terms of what happened there, and then why is that such a powerful question? And I'm really asking for kind of I guess my goal with this is that everybody listening who has team members or clients could maybe make good use and benefit from asking that question.
Yeah, so let me give 2 minutes of background as to why the question came up for Recruit. And Recruit is a Japanese human services company. So they, at this point, own Indeed and Glassdoor. And they're a $20 billion revenue company, 50,000 employees worldwide. You would not know that they would get there if you knew that they had a scandal in the late 1980s that was so great that the Prime Minister of Japan and his entire cabinet had to resign as a result of actions that they got involved with. And so Recruit is like, a poster child for, can lost trust be regained? Answer, yes, it can. And so it's not like game over. But they did some pretty amazing things. And I'll say a few of them, and then I'll get to answer your question. So one thing that they do, which is really important if something bad has happened, is that they apologized. And as business people, we have like an allergy when it seems like it's time for us to apologize. But in fact, if your goal is to restore trust, people expect you to be sorry for a harm that you've caused.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where, the lawyers have to kind of take a back seat because they have one goal, limit your liability. And this is a separate goal, possibly related, but maybe not, which is, how do I restore trust with this client?
Mm-hmm.
And so apologies are, and you can still read the story of the scandal on Recruit's website. So that's how seriously they took what they did, and they wanted the story told, and it's there forever. They then held someone accountable, and in their case, they were, you could call it lucky, because it was just their CEO who created this scandal. He went to jail. And so people could sort of say, okay, is Recruit a bad company? Yeah, well, they had like this really bad CEO. And so there is this notion of trying to hold people accountable. The question of sort of why are you here came up in sort of the third step of the process, which is where you really have to think about, what are the root causes here? What do I need to be paying attention to? And quite often, some of these problems are an opportunity. So in Recruit's case, what happened was, at that moment, they actually had not much cash coming in. And while customers still liked them, they couldn't do the things that a Japanese company normally does, like give you lifetime employment, because they didn't know if they were going to be around too much longer. And they couldn't attract people on that basis. And so they had always had this notion that people do better work if they think their work has purpose. And in particular, if it connects to things that matter to them personally and also matter to society. And this is like from the 1980s and 70s that they were thinking about this, way before the rest of us have kind of caught up. And so the why are you here question is a way of getting people to focus on some essential notions about what is it that they're trying to accomplish. So their performance appraisals, they take a look at you, they ask you to take a look 6 months out and 3 years out. And the reason why they do that, that's why are you here writ large. And it's really saying that we have a stake, you have a stake in building your career here or building a piece of it. And so they want you to sort of think very broadly about where it is that you think you're headed. They also have a practice of giving as much responsibility as they can really junior into the organization. And they do that because their essential promise is they try to be a good place to be from. So most companies say, you know, I want to be the great place and you stay there forever. No one stays forever except maybe the founder, right? At this point. And so the question is, how can you be a place where people go, I really learned great stuff while I was there. And it's a mark of distinction to have that company's name on my resume. And that's what Recruit eventually went after, was the kind of experience that they could give people that would allow them to be from Recruit and to have people say, oh my gosh, you know, you must know a lot. If you worked in a place where people stopped you and asked, why are you here? They know that they got some very good training.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful. I think about many of the conversations and work that we've been doing internally with our team members as well, and really trying to create the right culture, getting everybody aligned around the values. And while I've never necessarily asked the question directly, like, why are you here to team members? I can just attest from my own experience of having that conversation, like, what's meaningful for you? You know, what do you want to create? How can we support you more? We've definitely seen the benefits of having that kind of conversation and using that type of language. So for anybody who's tuning in right now, who has a team, and even that's, if it's contractors you want to work with longer term, or, you know, full-time team members, that this kind of conversation, I think, is incredibly powerful in letting people know that your team members, letting them know that you care about them and that you want to help them to grow and to improve. And if that can be within your organization long-term, fantastic. But also if it sets them up, as you're saying, to do something in the future, then at least that's a positive thing that you can feel good about, rather than just trying to, you know, kind of ignore that and just hope that things work out.
Right. It also is a very good expression or example of one of the things we found in our trust research, which is that trust is built from the inside out. So if you want to
that a bit more.
If you want to be trusted by people outside your organization, the people inside have to feel that they're trusted. Because they are the ones who actually are doing the work and engaging with the clients.
Yeah.
And so that's why this connection between how they feel, how inspired they are, and the thing that's different about why are you here is it's not, I want you to buy into my vision. It's what is your vision.
You're right. Yeah. I think that's so powerful, because then you're aligning everything that you're doing with that person and the company to support what their vision is and where they want to go and how they want to be. What I'd love to do, Sandra, because we're talking a lot about a few, like, there's different elements going on through the conversation. I'd love to know from your research and all the work that you've done and have been doing, to cover 3 things with you. Number 1 is, what can consultants and just people in general do to build trust? Then what are maybe some of the most common mistakes that you see people making where they go and actually lose trust? And then finally, you touched on this, but what are the steps people can take? What are kind of the best practices to regain trust? Let's say if you've lost trust with a supplier, a vendor, a client, whatever it might be. So if we were to just start off at the top there, like, how to build trust, what are a couple or a few best practices that people can take to build trust in the marketplace, and especially with clients and team members?
It helps. 2 things are important at the start. The first is just, how do you define trust? And so, and a lot of the work, we describe our work as putting a spine on trust. No one is going to say, oh, it's really not important to be trusted. The
Right.
question is that when we poked at it, it was like we didn't know, like, so what's okay, so why do people trust? I'm a business. What should I do about that? How can
Mm.
I approach that? And so briefly, I'm just going to ask people to think about their experience getting a COVID vaccination. And think about what you were feeling, what you were thinking, and that helps you to understand that trust is vulnerability.
Mhm.
It's vulnerability to other people's actions and intentions. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I was pretty nervous getting my vaccine. I knew I needed it and all that stuff, but I really hoped that the people at Pfizer were on their game when they were doing it. I
Mm.
wasn't sure, does this thing really going to work? Is it going to prevent me from getting a bad case of COVID if I do happen to get it? And so that's what trust is. Trust is when your clients are vulnerable to
Mm.
actions that you take as a company. And so it always starts with the perspective of the other person. Right.
Mm.
So we're not talking about how do you feel trusting. It's more, do they trust you?
Right.
And then what we found is that, and I'll try to do this relatively briefly, that people trust based on 4 dimensions. And let me spell them out using Uber as an example. Okay, so Uber, the first dimension is competence. Right. So if you're not good at delivering the service that you say you're going to do as a consultant, you are not going to be in business very long. And so
Mm.
competence is the foundation of trust. It's funny because you don't think about it that way, but actually, why would you do business with anybody who wasn't good at what they did?
Right.
And so that's actually where trust starts. And so Uber gets us from point A to point B. They changed ride hailing as we know it. Super competent. And then on the other hand, there are lots of people who really have qualms about using an Uber. And so that kind of says, well, guess what? Competence isn't enough,
Mhm.
right? If competence were all it took, then I would just happily get into an Uber any old time. And it turns out I'm one of those people that actually has some second thoughts.
Mm.
There was even, a hashtag at one point at delete Uber from people who got so annoyed about the company. And so the other things that matter, quickly are, the first one is just what are their motives? Can I trust that they're going to protect my interests as well as their own?
Mm.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to jump in just to kind of clarify a little bit. So, would that mean if, as a company, sharing your values, talking more about what you believe in, would that go in your research to help and having people feel more comfortable that there's the alignment there?
Yeah, so I think you can tell people stuff, and that's really important. They're going to judge you by whose interest they see you protecting.
Mm. Okay.
You see,
Are there any best practices that you've seen or examples of companies that have taken these kind of concepts and run with them very well? I mean, maybe you want to kind of continue on the Uber path, but I'm just wondering, for the consultants that are listening right now, what steps might they be able to take, something kind of more tangible that's kind of tried and true that they could use to build more trust?
Right. Let me think in order. This research is relatively new. So I also studied layoffs.
Yeah.
So people have been studying layoffs since the 1990s. There's a very robust, very interesting literature on why layoffs are as difficult as they are for organizations, individuals. Trust research is actually pretty new.
Mm.
And so there's not the same body of knowledge that you would want to have about what's tried and true. So when you say, but I can tell you, inductively working with examples in companies. So here's an example of someone who had to balance interests in a way that showed that he had good motives. So the person in question is Dave Cote. He's CEO of Honeywell. It's 2008, and he knows he's going to need to do something to reduce costs because of the Great Recession.
Mm-hmm.
He knows it involves his employees, and he has to figure out what to do. And the way he reasoned his way through it is something like this. He said, well, you know what? There is no business if we don't pay attention to customers. So customers is the first group whose interests we need to protect.
Mm-hmm.
After that, we need to then balance the interests of employees and shareholders. So employees would just assume we forget about profit during the recession. keep everyone on board, keep all the pay the same. And we probably can't do that. Shareholders would just assume that we take a very quick layoff. 20,000 people go away, and all of a sudden we've saved some money.
Right.
But we can't do that either. And so what he ended up doing was a furlough between 1 and 5 weeks, depending on which division you were in, that allowed the company to save money and allowed him to have an intact workforce to meet the needs of customers, which then in turn allowed shareholders to have a remarkable return at the end of the recession, because he kept people on board. What happened was that they ended up being in a position to meet customers' needs better than their competitors, and their stock price showed that. So this is how trust works. It's always this question about who are my stakeholders. It's always interest balancing and trying to figure out sort of what your priorities are. And so the world gets a little bit easier, perhaps. I might ask you, if you're a consultant, so I've got me, I've got the client, and I've got my team. Does that strike you as hard a trade-off as the kind he had to make?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's for some people it might feel just as hard, but it's certainly for most consultants a lot fewer moving parts, right? Compared to so the complexity in reality would be less, but somebody who's dealing with that challenge right now would still, for them, feel very acute. It would feel like the world might be ending. But I think one thing that you just mentioned, Sandra, that really resonates with me, and I think is a powerful kind of framework or concept, or just is really about slowing things down and asking yourself, who are the players, who's involved in this, and how can I structure a win-win for all parties? And the reality is that not everybody necessarily can get 100% of what they want, but if you're clear on what the priorities are and what you want to achieve, and thinking not just short term but also longer term, that can then help to influence and allow you to make a better decision.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think that it is exactly that way of thinking about these things that will help people, because regardless of you, if you're not Dave Cote, I mean, he runs a certain scale business, but your business matters to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that notion of both slowing things down, and in particular getting clear on sort of who's involved here, what are their interests, and what am I going to do about that? I think that's exactly right.
Okay, so we covered now a little bit of how to build trust, and of course, people who want to go deeper, right? They should pick up a copy of your book, check your work, because there's a lot more detail there than we can cover in a podcast. But I do want to have you speak a little bit more to this idea of how do people lose trust? What are the most common ways that you see or you feel in your experience that people in professional services, consultants, just companies in general, can lose the trust of the marketplace or their team members or their clients?
So one of the other dimensions of trust that is really important is, what is the actual impact of the work that you do? And for consultants, that sometimes is hard. Okay. Right?
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So you get brought in, I've got this problem, you seem to be a problem solver. And the question is, at the end of your engagement with me, what will be the indisputable, we can all see it, and I can judge it for myself as to what the impact of your work has been. Now, what I can tell you is that people, when they evaluate whether or not an organization is trustworthy, that's one of the first things they look at. Is you say you want, to be good for the environment, but you're lobbying against any kind of regulation that would allow that to take place, right? And so it's this discrepancy that people are looking for. But most of it is that, if you're in the Boeing business, airplane falls out of the sky, I don't care what you tell me if you're Dennis Muhlenberg, I am going to hold Boeing responsible, and the impact, 346 people die. Okay, that's what I'm going to remember about this company. Right. And so I asserted, and I don't know if this is true, I don't know from my own internal consulting, that sometimes getting a handle on what was that concrete thing that came out of the work that we did together, I think sometimes that's hard. And in particular, how can you understand what that looks like from the client's point of view? Right. So you know what you were trying to accomplish, but the question is, at the end, what do they see? And how do they feel about what they see?
Right. So just again, working through this kind of with you collaboratively, for a consultant, it sounds like what you're saying is, in your experience, it's very important to get clear and to create alignment with the client in terms of what does success look like for this project. Therefore, allows you to make sure that when the project is done or as you're working through it, that you don't find yourself, doing work that the client actually doesn't really want, or you haven't gone down a different path, because that would then start to, like, you lose trust, right? If you're the client and you're paying for somebody to help you with something, and you're finding that you're not getting the result that you want, or that they're working on stuff but it's not aligned with the outcome that you desire, that would cause a loss of trust in that person to be able to deliver. And so getting alignment early on, and then probably having contact throughout, like checking in to make sure that you're still on the right path, would be a great way to to keep the trust going, if we could say that. Does that kind of resonate and align with what you're?
Yeah, I think that that's good. I think that there's also a kind of a back end thing to pay attention to is, are there unintended consequences of the work that you've done?
Okay.
So
Can you give an example of that, or what you mean?
yeah, so let me think. So if I put in place a new compensation system, right, and on the basis of which people will either make more or less pay, and it's a variable compensation system where, depending on how good your business unit is doing, you'll make more money. And if you're in a business unit where things are not so great, you don't really have access to as much incentive pay.
Right.
So on the one hand, this is fair because the people who have this opportunity to make more money are able to do it. And it's unfair because you've got a whole lot of people saying, oh, wait a minute, what's up with this compensation system where it depends on what unit I'm in as to whether or not I make money. So that's an example of an unintended consequence. You didn't set out to be unfair.
Right.
But in fact, at the end, you actually are unfair to the people who don't get to benefit.
Right.
And so it's really trying to, and this is something where you need to align really carefully with the organization to see that people will be candid with you about what they're seeing as spillover effects of the work that you're doing, and getting them to take some responsibility and to help you understand and help them understand, are these good things that we're trying to do actually working out the way we want them to? Or are they ending up having some consequences that we couldn't have anticipated, but that we now know we need to pay attention to? So upfront, align, and later on sort of say, okay, now that we've done some work, okay, what's happened with that work? And are there some second or third order effects that we need to be aware of? Because that's part of what withdraws trust. So you guys put in the system, but then people ended up just being so angry about it that I'm not sure I want to do business with you again, because even though that wasn't what we intended, this is the outcome.
So let's use the example now where somebody has lost trust. Their client doesn't trust them as much as they would like. Something happened, whatever it was. You talked about one way to kind of start to try and kind of redeem that trust or get it back is to say, I'm sorry. What else? What are the other kind of best practices or ideas here if somebody finds themselves in a situation where there's been a loss of trust with their client or with a team member? What other advice would you have for them?
Yeah, so it turns out that apologizing actually is not just saying you're sorry. So there's academic literature on apologies. And so here are the 3 steps of a good apology. The first is that you acknowledge responsibility for what it was that happened. So this is not mistakes were made. This is, I did this and I'm sorry about it. The second thing that you do is some explanation about how it was that things ended up that way. This can't be defensive, but it has to be sort of like, here's how I understand how I ended up doing that thing. And it's a way of helping other people say, okay, you've thought some about this.
Right.
And you've tried to understand. And the third part is an offer of repair.
Yeah.
So that's where you have to come in and say, here's what I'm going to do. So PwC, in their Oscars, in one year, they actually had the wrong card. And they acknowledged the wrong film as having won. And the next morning on their website, they had an apology that asked for forgiveness. Again, that basically said, we're so sorry about this, film versus that. They then had an explanation that said that the person who was in charge, people who were in charge, they were actually on their cell phone and they were distracted. And then the offer of repair was that they were going into their process to try to fix it. And so they fixed it obviously by telling people they're not allowed to have cell phones when they're on stage. They also required everybody to memorize the name of the winners.
Mm.
And so that's what recovering trust looks like.
Yeah, I love
So
it. That's like a three-part framework, right? The apology, the here's kind of how it happened, why it happened, the situation, review, and then here's what we're doing to make it right.
right, right. And if you can do something like that, most people, most well, who you have a pretty good relationship anyway with, they're going to get that. And so it definitely helps, and that's the equivalent of what this company Recruit did sort of writ large, because they're a big organization, but it's also the kind of thing that you would want your own consulting firm to do.
Right. Got you. So 3 questions before we wrap up here that I want to go over with you. The first, Sandra, is if you were to pass on one habit that you really feel has been beneficial to your career, to rising up through the ranks, to seeing success, on the world stage, and if you were to pass that on to a family member, a loved one, somebody that you really care about, what would be kind of one habit that you feel like you've cultivated over the years that has served you really well?
So here's a habit I work on. I don't know how well I do this, and I can think of examples where I don't do it particularly well. I've tried to learn how to be objective about my own performance.
Mm. Okay. Can you tell me more about like how do you walk us through how you approach that?
So if I've done something and I get some feedback that says, "Whoa, Sandra, that was not good," then I have to really sort of treat that as if I'm talking about like a third person,
Mm.
a third party, and really dig in and try to understand what was it that was happening in me such that I did that. And so because all of us get feedback throughout our careers, and the question is, what do you do with that?
Right.
And what I found is I was becoming so defensive, I couldn't take anything in. And so I had to learn that there's like this avatar of Sandra next to me,
Right.
and it's that Sandra that I'm thinking about, and to really be objective and just say, whoever it is that gave me that feedback, they're trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I do that? So this is hard to do. And as recently as today, I've had people sort of call me out on something that I did, where it didn't go down well, and I've had to sort of step back and say, okay, that's Sandra. What was she doing at
Right.
that point in time that had that happen? So that's one thing.
And do you find that as you're kind of giving that consideration, you can often identify things that you also did right, as well as then things that you'd want to improve? Like, or do you focus just more on what did I do wrong? How do I make it better? Or as you're being objective, can you actually find, well, yeah, I understand what they're saying, but here's the justification for why I did that. And here's maybe one thing that I could do different next time and therefore improve. How do you kind of typically find yourself processing that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great point, Michael. And part of that is, okay, what I was intending to do was X,
Mhm.
right? And so how can I learn how to do that thing better
Right.
that I was trying to do? That's the reason why it didn't work well.
Mm.
And so there's always activities that we're better at and worse at. And I think, having that kind of, sounds awful, kind of developmental mindset that says, okay, this looks like something I better put on my list,
Right.
and then really going after it.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to figure out how to get better at this thing because I know it drives people crazy. I think that, that's helpful. And it does turn into a sort of a positive thing because eventually you get tired of beating yourself up. And eventually you'll kind of come in and sort of say, okay, can I twist this around so it
Mhm.
becomes a goal?
I think it's just such a wonderful concept because so often we're all just so busy doing what we're doing. We don't usually take as much time as we should to contemplate and give consideration to why are we actually doing these things? How can we make them better? Like what went right? What went wrong? How can I improve? And I've personally found, I think, as I've tried to make more time to do that, that not only are we able to get clearer on our priorities, make better decisions, but we're also really able to, in many cases, like accelerate the results that we want to see because, again, we're constantly improving. So I think that's really really wonderful advice. Second question: best book you've read in the last 6 months? Could be nonfiction, fiction, just anything that you've really enjoyed.
So it's not a book. So I am a passionate fanatic about K-drama. So this is Korean TV.
K-drama. Okay, I'm taking my time in Japan. I was like, I know a lot of people who love K-drama. That's Korean drama. I wasn't expecting you to say that. All right, tell me
Yeah.
what's happening in the K-drama
So,
world.
so K-dramas, for those of you who don't watch them, so this is an art form in South Korea. And what it is, it's long form TV serials. Where, and literally when I say long form, each episode is usually about an hour and 20 minutes, and they're usually like 20 episodes.
Mm.
So this is a commitment that you make. But what's so great about it is, unlike our films, they are very much kind of multi theme. And so a lot of them are romantic, but in that there's always like a character who's bad and evil, right? Or even the ones that are about good versus bad, there's usually some romance.
Right.
And there's always humor. And it's a fascinating exposure to a different culture where things, even things like what you say to people when you leave after a hard day, they say fighting. And that's their way of sort of giving people some encouragement, and you did well, you did hard work today. And so on my author website, I actually put a guide to my 20 favorite K-dramas.
Wow.
Because
Are these, Sandra, are these historical? Like I remember when I was in Japan, there's a lot of these kind of Japanese, more historical, going back into history, where there would also be these series. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking more modern day?
Yeah, so there are like three genres. One is modern day, either action or romance.
Right.
And then there's historical ones that have to do with Japan's, with Korea's imperial age, the Joseon era. And then they do an amazing amount of stuff with high school.
Okay.
And with young people and their challenges. And so those are kind of the three basic genre. And within modern, times, there's action and romance. And so there are definitely different types, but most of them at this point are actually not historical. Most of them are actually take place in current times.
Well, I'm certainly no K-drama expert. I'm sure I've watched some over the years, just being in Japan, and exposed myself to just different television film. But I do love international film and programs. I find very often these days the quality coming from overseas is so much better than what's coming from North America. Where are you accessing this content? How someone who wants to maybe see these kinds of things, where would you suggest that they go to view it?
So Netflix has a surprisingly large bank of these things. And so if you're starting, and if you like action, the one you might want to start with is called Vincenzo. And this is about a guy who is a Korean who ends up getting raised in Italy. He is a consigliere to the mafia, and he returns to Korea to repatriate some gold. And it's all about like the moral code of being a mafia member, some really evil people in Korea who are in business who he goes up against. And so it's wonderful. It's very compelling. So, but Netflix has lots of these. If you actually get really totally committed, then Viki, VIKI, is the Asian streaming service of Rakuten.
Okay.
And so that's the other place where you can then see lots and lots of them. But for most people that have access to Netflix, just honestly, go in and say K-drama or some version of that, and then you'll see yourself finding them.
There we go. I was not expecting that, but I love that. Third and final question: where can people go to learn more about you, the book, and what you're working on?
Yeah, so they can go to sandrasucher.com. So that's my author website. They can also go to thepoweroftrustbook.com. That's our book website. Or they can just look me up, honestly, at Harvard Business School. And go into my faculty profile, and you'll see all the links that I just said. And so I'd love to hear from people, actually, because I care about how these things work out in real businesses with people who want to try to do something. And so we put on our book website a sort of a write to us form for people to tell us about trust challenges that they're working on and what they found out. And that's how we might be able to, for example, learn more about the world of consultants and how trust plays out.
Wonderful. We'll have that all linked up in the show notes. Sandra, again, thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great interview. Really appreciate it.